Despite recent proclamations that the race for the nomination is essentially a two-man contest between himself and Donald Trump, and after his repeated calls for Governor John Kasich to drop out of the race, Texas Senator Ted Cruz suffered a bruising third-place finish in Tuesday's New York primary, finishing double digits behind Trump and Kasich. So what went wrong, and where does the Cruz campaign go from here in its effort to secure the nomination in one of the wildest political years in memory? Let's find out with Ron Nehring, national spokesman for the Ted Cruz campaign. He's also a former California state chairman of the Republican National Committee. He joins me from Houston. Do you have to, Ron, it appears mathematically that you're going to have to go to a second and third ballot for your candidate to prevail. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think it's very likely that we wind up going to a second or third ballot, and that's okay. The convention is designed to handle that. But at the end of the day, we have to come out of the Republican National Convention in Cleveland with a candidate who can earn the majority support of the Republican Party, either going into the convention or coming out of the convention. So one or the other will happen.
Did you expect to do as badly as you did in New York?
You know, I don't think there was any real surprise there, both on the Democratic side with Hillary Clinton, who had once represented the state in the Senate, and with Donald Trump. This is his home state. John Kasich was even able to win his own state of Ohio, even though he's won nowhere else. And so it wasn't a big surprise. We didn't invest a tremendous amount of resources in New York like we might in another state where we would be more competitive, this being Donald Trump's own state. So we concentrated in the weeks leading up to New York on picking up delegates across 5 states, winning 5 states, Colorado, North Dakota, Wyoming, Utah, and Wisconsin. And over the course of that period, we gained over 100 delegates there. So that's even more delegates than Donald Trump picked up yesterday in New York.
How do you react to the Trump constant campaign about rigging?
Well, he's going to say that because every time Donald Trump loses an election, which has been with increasing frequency over the course of the last couple of weeks, he can't take responsibility onto himself. He has to blame somebody else. He blames the rules, or he blames the party, or, the weather, or, atmospheric phenomenon, or whatever. But he has to ultimately blame somebody else. And the reality is that his campaign is kind of a hot mess right now. If you read the, political papers, articles in terms of, people are leaving and people are coming and someone is getting fired and somebody else is quitting. And, this is, you're in the middle of the Super Bowl here, and his staff is going to be trying to figure out, well, how do I get my email on my phone, and where's my desk, and what's my extension? That's not a good place for their campaign to be right now.
Okay, Ron, next week you got Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. What are your prospects?
Well, we've already launched our campaign in Maryland. We were in Pennsylvania today as well as yesterday. Those are 2 very important states as part of this process where we'll wind up picking up delegates as we go forward. But right now, it's not so much winning states as it is winning delegates as we move forward toward ultimately wrapping this campaign up in June in California, where we've been preparing since last August.
Senator Cruz, campaigning in Pennsylvania, said to the crowd in Philadelphia, "This is the year of the outsider. I'm an outsider." He's a senator. How could he be an outsider?
Well, I think if you take a look at Senator Cruz's record in the Senate, this is somebody who didn't go to Washington, D.C. in order to, play the game by the rules of the Washington cartel and, and just sit there and be quiet and do what you're told. This is someone in Senator Cruz who's challenged the status quo in both parties, has challenged the leadership in his own party as well as in the other party, and people have seen that. And this is someone who's spoken with a great deal of courage, challenging this Washington cartel that so many Americans are frustrated with, this network of lobbyists and interest groups and longtime incumbents and staffers and the like, where Republicans took control of both chambers of Congress, didn't see much change there, and there's been a great deal of frustration on the part of the American people that the true agenda that would move that would increase our prospects for prosperity in America forward has taken a back seat in too many cases to an agenda that's really driven by Washington, D.C. special interests.
Ron, they say perception is reality. How do you deal with the perception that Ted Cruz is not well liked?
Well, it's interesting because I don't think in this election, having endorsements from people with a 202 area code has really been the key to success. If that were the case, one of the other 17 or 16 Republican candidates would wind up being in the position which we're in right now instead of no longer running. By contrast, in California, for example, last week, we released a list of 50 more Republican elected officials, current and former, including the former leaders of the Republicans in the state assembly and the state Senate, who've backed Senator Cruz. So in terms of support out in the country, outside of Washington, D.C., there's a lot of that coming because Senator Cruz, at the end of the day, represents those issues and champions those issues that bring people to the Republican Party, the grassroots of the party.
Trump hits hard on trade, and he says that Senator Cruz has backed past trade deals which were terrible. How does the senator respond?
Well, there are important improvements that have to be made in terms of taking the foot off of the back of American business that hurts our economic competitiveness. And we can bring jobs back to America, but the way we do that is not by levying new tariffs, which are a tax, which would send the price of every type of good, up through the roof. And it's the wealthy who can afford that, but the middle class and people aspiring to be in the middle class have a much harder time dealing with the type of tariffs that Donald Trump wants to impose. Instead, Senator Cruz, with his tax reform proposal, would create a dramatic shift in the competitiveness of American businesses so that you eliminate many of these incentives which companies have to move jobs overseas, and those jobs can be brought back here. The way we do that is by making the American economy more competitive, making our tax system more competitive, not by creating new taxes that ultimately are going to hurt American consumers.
Ron, Americans tend to not vote for extremes, and what usually happens is when people run in primaries, far left or far right, they have to come back to the middle. How does Cruz, if he gets the nomination, get to the middle?
Well, I think ultimately candidates are evaluated not just based upon their philosophy, but also based upon their narrative, their story. That is, what have they done with their lives? What does their record show? For example, Hillary Clinton has big problems in terms of her honesty and trustworthiness. That's not a partisan issue. That's something which Democrats are concerned about as much as Republicans are when you take those party labels away. So ultimately, every candidate is going to be evaluated not only upon their philosophy, but on their narrative as well as the skill and their experience that they bring to the table. One thing is going to be true about Senator Cruz, though. He's not going to change who he is. He's not going to change his ideas. He's the same person in the Senate today as he was when he was elected to the Senate by the people of Texas overwhelmingly the first time. That's why he won his own state in this primary by a very, very healthy margin. And he's going to continue to say what he means and mean what he says. And I think that addresses part of the frustration which Americans have, that we have too many people who in the Republican Party, they claim that they're conservatives. Everybody claims to be a conservative in the primary, and then they'll go to Washington and too often roll over for the network of special interests who are already there waiting for them.
Ron, always good talking with you. We'll stay close.
Thanks, Larry.
That's Ron Nehring, the national spokesman for the Ted Cruz presidential campaign. We appreciate your time.